Okay then, so this is the final panel. And so far in the panel sessions we have heard about things like historical figures, we've heard about geographical context and considerations, we've heard about the nature and the impact of the various scenes and networks that spring up around this type of music. But one of the ideas that after Chris and I had for this panel, and something we were very keen to explore, was the future. So how can we explore the future? Well, we can't really because we've not got any crystal balls, but what we're going to try and do is talk about some issues that might relate to how jazz might move, change, develop, progress, continue from the position we're at just now. And hopefully what we're going to do is build on the panels that we've had so far and really try and tie everything together. No pressure. So this session, I guess tantalisingly, is called Futures. And development, continuation, progression is really what we're looking for. And in order to discuss it, we've got a fantastic panel, and you'll notice we've got 4 members on this panel because it's such a lot to cover. So I'm going to talk about each one of them very briefly by way of introduction, and then we'll get down to some paneling, if that's a word. So we've got Tom Bancroft here, who you've already met. He's a drummer, composer, band leader, and educator. He's actually trained as a medical doctor, but Tom now makes his living from music, and he's played with musicians ranging from Sun Ra and Martin Bennett to Jerry Allen and Bill Wells. In 2007, he won the BBC Jazz Award for Innovation and a Herald Angel Award for his kids' music show Kidsimonium, and in 2004 he won Creative Scotland Award. After running the Scottish jazz record label company Caber Music for 7 years, he now runs the music education company ABC Creative Music with his twin brother Phil. The company produces music creativity education resources for mainstream schools and has over 7,000 teachers signed up to their website who use the lessons and materials that yourself and Phil have created in teaching creativity and improvisation to young children. Next, we've got Luca Vitali, who we have also already met this weekend, but Luca is one of the founding members of Europe Jazz Media, a community of jazz journalists, media professionals and broadcasters. He's organised various contemporary music and performing arts events, and since 2010 he's worked as one of the artistic curators of Bologna's Angelica Festival. He's collaborated with various Norwegian institutions in Italy, the Royal Norwegian Embassy, Royal Norwegian Consulate in Bologna, as well as the Jazz Forum, Music Norway and Listen to Norway.
And every time I forget to say that I wrote a book.
And of course,
all the time I don't put in my bio. I'm very self-promoted by myself.
You need to get your publicist sorted on that one, I think. So yeah, Luca is the author of The Sound of the North, which we've talked about a few times this weekend, and we should definitely say that it's on sale in the foyer at the price of £14.50. I'll sort you out, 10%, it's fine. Next along the line, we've got Dave Kane. Dave was born in Bangor, Northern Ireland, and he moved to England to complete a BA in contemporary music and a master's degree in composition from Leeds College of Music. Dave's a self-taught virtuoso of the double bass, and he's performed and recorded internationally at many established jazz festivals. He's currently based in Leeds, and Dave is one of the founders of LIMA, which is an acronym for Leeds Improvised Music Association, and is a manic driving force, musical director, he said manic, I didn't say manic, driving force and composer for the Lima Orchestra, a large ensemble featuring some of the UK's finest musicians. He's also a member of the internationally acclaimed trio BDK with pianist Matthew Bourne and drummer Steve Davis. And finally we have Niels Overgaard. Niels has been dubbed no ordinary jazz blogger by Danish national broadsheet Politiken, having over the past decade become Denmark's most respected and prolific jazz critics. With a deep interest in the music's historical framework, Niels writes predominantly about Danish jazz. Through his unstinting commitment to his interest, he has gained an unparalleled overview of jazz from the region. What a panel. Okay, so I emailed these gents in advance and said roughly the kind of things that we might want to talk about for this panel, and then each one of them responded with things that were not only more interesting but far better and with a great deal more depth as well. So I think for the most part I'm going to try and stay just a guiding force in the panel and hand over to these guys as much as possible. So obviously we've got people from a variety of backgrounds as the biographies show, and we'll inevitably come to these conversations from different directions. But I think we're going to kick off with Luca first, who emailed me with a really provocative statement about the Trondheim Jazz Conservatory. And you set up this this binary between Trondheim on one hand and Berkeley on the other hand, suggesting that they've got two very different methods of doing things. Whereas at Trondheim, you are supposed to find your voice and don't emulate the giants of the past and follow your own roots.
Yeah, about Trondheim, I wrote a lot about this because for me it was very important now, not as only for teaching. Every musician that studied there talked to me about more about the free time, more about how to be in a collective of people that work at open air. It was a sort of a workshop at open air, not only in the classroom, not only teaching them to play as at Berkeley in a perfect style or in a up and down on scale on giant steps all the life. That it was a sort of very different way, and when they started in 1978, they wanted to try to push all the musicians to follow their own way and their own voice. That was for me very good point of departure. Also because there in Trondheim they worked a lot also in for trying to have first of all a band in a classroom and not only to teach them. And then this band could play there. Trondheim is not a very big city, and at that time the Studentat, it was a quite famous building there. It was a place where every musician could play, and many of them said me that they became also a sort of teacher in for amateur or for new kind of musicians that want to play in a marching band or this kind of stuff. It became a sort of hub in Trondheim, how to teach, learn and play music, not just teaching and learning about how to play music. That was for me very important. And to see how this kind of group of teachers didn't want to teach them aesthetics, it was very important because most of the teachers there didn't like the music of Super Silent or about farmers market or Airamero or this kind of stuff. But they didn't want to stop these musicians to follow their own way. They wanted to push them. It was absolutely opposite to Berkeley. If you see a couple of musicians, today Petter talked about Petter Vetter maybe. If you see to Petter Vetter and Darrell Henriksen are typical example. Petter Vetter was in Berkeley and played as an Afro-American saxophonist, and Arve Henriksen played like a Japanese shakuhachi and have a vision of the music that it's more far from, is a member of, founding member of Super Silent, very different kind of approach. That for me, it's a sort of mantra that we should try to find in every situation where you have university, teaching and festival or club and stuff. Try to put together the energy and push musicians to find their own voice.
Yeah, I completely agree, 100%. I think that you should provide an environment that facilitates the student and not facilitates the teacher, you know, so it shouldn't be about if I'm into, you know, Coltrane or if I'm into like mad experimental free jazz. It's not about what I'm into, as you said. You should be completely open to what the student wants to say. So it should be about them searching for their own artistic integrity. And Trondheim's amazing. Well, from what I've seen, it develops artists. It develops people who are producing work and then go out and they do, you know, get gigs, make albums, make art. Rather than being kind of told, oh, well, you know, you can get to that, but first of all, you have to learn how to play giant steps in 12 keys. You know, if that has no resonance at all to the student, then it's a waste of their time and effort to learn to do it. So they should be given I think the opportunity, like all of those things should be exposed to students, so they should know about, like straight ahead, the history, the jazz canon, but also know about like European jazz, know about the British free jazz scene, know about Derek Bailey, know about Finnish jazz, like all of the music that's happened in the last 70 years, and then just kind of give it to them and say, what resonates with you the most, and then let them, you facilitate it, and they kind of guide them into what they want to do, but kind of don't tell them you have to do this. You know what I mean? I think that's.
Well, you've got a lot of experience in teaching in conservatoires and music colleges.
Yeah,
do
a few
you
different places.
find that seems like a very sensible and noble view? Do you find that rings true in the places you've worked?
Well, that's why I'm not working anywhere at the minute. It's because I currently, in the places that I did teach, they didn't follow the same viewpoint. But then some places that I have taught, whenever the rhythm changes thing was on a couple of years ago, and I was a sort of composer in residence on a project in that, talking about is there such a thing as musician's identity? And we've done the same project in Stavanger and in Amsterdam Conservatoire. And then we've done it in the UK as well, and it was really interesting to see the different approaches from each of the institutions, and the Norwegian one and the one in Amsterdam were a lot more open than the one in the UK, which was quite interesting.
So just for the sake of broadening out the discussion so that everyone can join in, can you give us an example of the kind of things that might be less broad or perhaps problematic? By no means do you have to be personal about institutions, but just an overview of your understanding.
I think the most interesting thing that I found was that in Amsterdam, it was just because you had students from all over Europe. There was actually no one from Holland in the group. It was a large ensemble, but they were from everywhere. You had like students from Ireland, Norway, Spain. And they had a sense of community together a lot more, so it wasn't really about themselves, it was about like creating something together, and there seemed to be like an empathy there, which is surely what we're all trying to develop as musicians, is to create something that's going to provide a better society, not to sound a bit hippie-ish, but that is really what we're trying to do. And in Amsterdam, it seemed to me that was really, really apparent. Possibly because they're all coming from different places within Europe and within all over the world, and there seemed to be a more community spirit there than in some of the other places where they were more kind of self-driven or wanted to be like, oh well, I'm gonna play as fast as I can, or show off their chops rather than making music together. So. Yeah,
how do you find that then, Tom? Because obviously you're an accomplished musician, but you spend a lot of your time working with people at the other end of the scale, younger children, and developing materials for younger children. How does that fit in with your experience of education of this type of music?
Well, I think jazz education is a very young science, or young. It's early in the journey, and in Scotland. There was a jazz education conference here a couple of years ago, and Elvin Obset, I can't remember how to say his name, from Trondheim, came and gave this fantastic talk about their approach. And we asked him how many Scottish students have been to Trondheim, and he said none. And then we asked how many Scottish musicians have been to Berkeley, and it's something like 30. And I think, personally, I'm totally in favour of the Trondheim approach in terms of everything about it. But the issue here is that I think, Tommy Smith went to Berkeley as one of the first Scottish musicians to go there, and he became very successful very quickly. And I think a lot of people have said, well, how do I make a successful career? I need to do what he did. And obviously there's a lot of other reasons why Tommy is successful other than going to Berkeley. But I think this approach appeals to some people, and as far as I know, I encourage all of my students to go to Trondheim, but as far as I know, they teach in Norwegian, so there's maybe that's a barrier to it. But I do think that the music is splitting, so that there is a sense of the jazz as being essentially American and indeed Afro-American music. And that's the authentic jazz. And then there's this other, it's a global music where the skill set and the aesthetic is applied to a myriad of influences, including folk music in different countries and electronica and all these other things. So I do think we're on this sort of, people can be in both strands and they can jump between them, but intellectually there's almost Berkeley and Trondheim embody these two. There's this authentic American vision of what jazz is, and there's this it's a global music and it can be European. And I think maybe there's a battle between the two, and I know which side I'm on, for sure.
Okay.
But I don't know if this side is winning, or if it should be winning and losing.
Are they winning, or are they running?
Maybe they're running in parallel.
Yeah. Well, it strikes me that some of the tensions exist when if we use this analogy of the strands, it's the people on that American side say, well, you've got to learn, as Dave said, how to play like this, how to play the changes in all 12 keys before you can jump over and start doing the other stuff, which seems to be at least perceived as more experimental, more advanced, even because of the fact that it's viewed as the music that you get to once you're past a certain stage. How do you feel that fits with the journey that young people take to get to that?
Well, yeah, it's just simply not true. I don't think, because I do a lot of stuff with kids as well, like Tom does, and I work for Sirius, doing lots of their education things, and I've just finished a big project in 2 pupil referral units, so for young kids who've been kicked out of school. And it was called Pass It On, and we use a series of artists who come in and teach the children music. So we had Chris Sharkey come in and done a thing. We had a rapper called Testament. We had a violinist. So lots of different artists who come in, and essentially we're just teaching. We're not even, again, this is not teaching the kids. You're just facilitating them to express themselves through music. And that, well, obviously you couldn't go in and try to teach them jazz. It's more, I think, and something I'm really, really passionate about, is this idea of facilitating what the student wants to do.
Yeah, I think that's,
you know what I mean?
Yeah,
rather than you imposing what you think jazz is, or because whenever I used to teach at Leeds College of Music, and there was a big thing there that I was on the 3rd year, or I would teach 3rd year composition students and some people who had their individual project, and by the time it'd be the last year, and they'd kind of always have wanted to pursue a different music for the other 2 years, and so it's the final year, and they'd be pissed off and depressed that they haven't had the chance to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And that's already really bad, because the course has kind of not provided them with enough free space to pursue what they want to.
So this is really interesting to me, and I would seriously doubt, in fact, I'm certain of the fact that there's no one on that course that wears a dark cloak and tells them you can't do this type of jazz.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, what sometimes pushes people to one type of jazz is the actual strictures of formal assessment. I think with sitting within an academic setting, you've got to be able to assess people, and one of the easiest ways to assess people is to jump into the model that we've had for nearly a couple of 100 years that says, you play it, I'll tell you what I think of it, and then I'll pass down these tips onto you for how to play it better, and this kind of perpetuates. And actually, maybe in this other strand that's starting to come out, we don't necessarily know how to assess it in the same way. We don't necessarily know to say, well, actually, you didn't make that change there, so you're going to lose 5 marks because you didn't quite get the turnaround. If you've got something that's more open and it's more experimental, you've got to assess it in a completely different way that I feel higher education institutions might not quite have caught up with. For the most part, that is a huge generalisation. I know there are people in this room who are pioneering and moving away from that completely.
Can I add only one thing? I talked about Trondheim, because Trondheim, it was the first that was against Berkeley kind of idea. But if you see every conservatory in Norway, maybe Stavanger is one of the best now, you can see on Jacintro that every year other academy in Oslo are pushing in their own way. Everybody have his kind of frame. Everybody has his kind of not very, how to say, you have to be, but they push in their own way every musician in every academy. If you give a look to the musicians that come from Oslo, are very different from the musicians that comes from Stavanger or from Trondheim. And if I think to my country, in my hometown, it's very difficult to be an experimental musician at the conservatory in Bologna, because most of the time they want to teach you in a very precise direction. And every opportunity that you have to cooperate with a local jazz festival, or every other situation where the conservatory is involved in events, it's only because of bopper or this kind of musician. My town was a sort of lighthouse when we had the festival in the 60s where George Russell played there maybe, and now it seems that we are at bop period also, with the festival, with the clubs, with the conservatoire. And if you think in another way at the university, you have to be an hub that try to exchange with the event, with the place, to try to involve the city. You have to give a sign to the city, not only. And Trondheim, for me, it was the example for saying, okay, start. But if you think to the Stavanger Conservatoire, in Stavanger there is the most important free jazz scene of Norway, and the festival is absolutely a mainstream festival, and it seems that don't communicate together. It's a sort of fight. Why? You have in town is this kind of two souls and nobody want to put together. Maybe university should try to put together these two situations. Most of the time in Bologna we have some great composer or musician at the Festival Angelica, and it's not possible to arrange something with the conservatory. In the conservatory it seems that they are not interested. We did a lot of workshop inside there, and 2 people, 4, 5 people, Terry Wiley was there and nobody came. It's crazy. If you are a teacher, you have to come and do a sort of lesson about it. You have to do a test on that, because this is the lesson. Musicians that have to rise into the music, not only into the classroom. That's my opinion. I think that's you should be more in a collective way, but not a collective of musicians, a collective of community of music. That it's more important for me.
That's maybe a good thing to bring Niels in. Actually, you had some thoughts on that.
Yeah, but in Denmark it's been a big story. This just before the summer there was 2 Danish jazz musicians coming home from New York, and they told about a story about if they had wanted to learn to play jazz, they had to go to New York, because the Rhythmic Music Conservatory, who's in fact was started by jazz musicians in the 80s, kind of have left that area and was turned into more a performance art school where you could. One of the things one of the musicians were quoted for was when he attended one of the lessons a morning, a guy turned up and played the piano with his rear end. And it was like he said that had nothing to do with jazz. So if he wanted to play jazz, learn jazz, he left. And I think, okay, that's interesting, because he's a nice guy and he really plays the classical jazz good. But if the other way around, you can look at the Rhythmic Music Conservatory and see what has come out of it in the latest years. And I think one of the best examples is Maria Faust. She's Estonian, but has lived in Denmark for over 10 years. Came from Estonia, mainly a classical saxophone player, and turned into jazz over the time and some other fields, and started out in Esbjerg in the western part of Denmark and moved to Copenhagen, where she began to work with a lot of musicians. And 2 years ago, she won a Danish Music Award for an album, for the compositions on her album, with music that was inspired by Estonia, Estonian folk music. And there was it was an 9-piece band, and there was only one Dane in that. It was 2 Italians, Francesco Bigoni and Manuel Maniscalco, and a Norwegian tuba player, Daniel Herskadar, and a Swedish cornetist, Tobias Wiklund, and so on. It was. I think that's great if we can have, because it was kind of moving forward. It was not just standing on this solid ground called jazz, and you just couldn't get further on. And I think that's really a big effort they made.
Yeah.
So it's
and important. Then went on to be a bigger album and received
and they've
acclaim and
played around Europe and gathered.
It's also about the scene. I think that Copenhagen now it's a very good example. These 2 musicians, Francesco Bigoni and Emanuele Maniscalco, stayed in Italy for a long time, and yes, they had a sort of good rising, but arriving in Copenhagen, it seems that they rised 100% in 1 year instead of the year before. They come also both from Siena Jazz, but in Copenhagen the real big difference, it was not the Rytmisk school, it was the milieu, the atmosphere of the Rytmisk school, ELK, and interaction with these musicians. They started to play together in a very different situations with Mark Solborg, Maria Faust, and they became more international. They were not a local musician. They became very international, and they gave a sort of new impulse, new vibe also to Maria and this kind of project. But it's because of Copenhagen that have a festival that gave fair opportunity to every kind of style, every kind of genre. It's
so because of that
it's a meaning of community, and I think that Copenhagen now it's a very good example about this. How is Berlin for other reason? Talking 2 days ago with the producer of the Edinburgh Jazz Festival, he talked about Liverpool, that it's now very cheap town, and it's easier for people, for musicians that want to build up something, to go there and do there something, because cheaper apartment and a lot of stuff, and you can rise from the down and rise up everything. It's like in Berlin. Berlin, it became a real good hub also because it was cheaper for many musicians that came from abroad, and I remember many of Italian musicians that there became very creative. Antonio Borghini, many musicians had a sort of basement there and tried together to do something with the other musicians. It's important to create this kind of situations.
So if you've got some situations in which you can have, say, educational establishments putting out people who are interested in collaboration and cooperation and experimental music, and then coming together with other international people within the city, that creates something really quite interesting and fertile. But you made a really good point in the previous panel, Tom. You said that maybe you recognise more the opposite, whereby there are too many people coming out for too many gigs, and actually we're getting a situation of competition and have I represented that correctly?
Well, I mean, there's this. I'm sure Dave's had experience of seeing people that you've taught doing gigs that you might have done yourself, and you think, wait a minute, I taught that guy stuff, and he's now doing all these gigs. And I always say to my friends of the same age, we're crazy. We shouldn't be teaching anybody young, because they're better looking than us, and they come up and then they get all the. So, but joking apart, I think it's important that I personally feel inspired and excited by the young musicians coming out of all over the place, and the standard is incredibly high. I just worry for them that they're going to be able to make a living and build a career and these sort of things. And I don't think there's too many at all, but I think there's not enough opportunities for them to work. And I don't feel like there's anybody responsible for dealing with that.
Okay.
You know, there's nobody sort of looking out for them. Education is an easy proposition because it's like young people getting help to become better, and everyone loves that idea. But it's when they leave college, what are they going to do? And you know, are they going to become really frustrated and angry and, you know, left out? And it gets back to this conversation about power being concentrated in the hands of a small number of people about what jazz is, what good jazz is, what's successful. If there's a small number of people deciding these things, if you're outside of their area of interest, then it's incredibly hard to progress, you know. So people have to find their own way. So
yeah, and I guess it's hard to progress if you want to kind of walk down their streets, so to speak. But one of the things Dave was particularly keen to talk about, I know, was this idea that actually maybe starting your life as a working musician is about finding your own opportunities. You had a nice sentence in your email: rather than opting for the graduate approach of chasing background jazz gigs for 30 quid and a burger, you might want to go out and try and find and make some of your own opportunities.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with what Tom was saying there. It's like universities hopefully are nurturing, you know, the students while they're there, although loads of them aren't doing that either. And then and then they leave and it's like, all right, see you, we've got your 27 grand, we don't give a fuck what you do. Unless you get nominated for a Mercury Prize, and then we'll use it in our blurb about our university. You know what I mean? And that's the truth of it. So like, where's the research into students what do they do after they graduate? Be really interesting to see some proper research onto how many of them are making records, how many of them are touring, how many of them are actually pursuing life as an artist, or how many of them are playing background gigs, or you know, fighting each other for these gigs, or become like cabaret musicians. You know, so where is the research for that? I think that would be a really good and valid research project, would be to find what work graduates are going into. Yeah, and then I was saying about and then you have to develop your own scene. You know, so if you're not under the banner of a few of the, you know, big players on the UK scene, then you're not getting gigs, you know. So you have to form your own, which is what's happened at there's a strong DIY scene in kind of Leeds and Liverpool, not just in jazz, but like kind of underground, like a very sort of punk aesthetic, to kind of creating the own work and creating an environment to make new work and having people support it. I guess it's similar to what Pedro was talking about in his talk, and lots of that in Europe, in these kind of, you know, tobacco factories or whatever. They're unused buildings that are then becoming used as a framework to create new work, which I think is really brilliant. But the ethos is that you have to do it yourself, so there's not a lot of money in it, or until it gets to a certain level where there's maybe, you know, enough of you to pull together a funding application, or to get a bid, and then kind of get known as a collective. But then a lot of the times that happens, and then people start asking you for gigs. You can't, because you're just trying to put on your own work for the collective. So it is really difficult. I completely agree with Tom. I think it's I wouldn't want to be leaving university now. It would be mega scary, you know, to try and just figure out how you're gonna make ends meet as playing this music.
Maybe scary, mega scary, and actually the route you've just described is definitely the more difficult one, because you've got to find the venues and maybe fill out the funding applications and drive your mate's PA to the gig, you know, all these kind of things. But there must be advantages to that type of
Oh yeah. Oh no, definitely.
What
Like,
kind of advantages does that afford young musicians?
Well, because then your work's authentic. You know, you don't have to pander to anyone else. If you have, and if you're around a group of musicians that love playing with, and and out of that will come that you're probably really good mates with them, and you hang out, and as you're saying, like the community thing grows. So like in Copenhagen, or like it's not just your band. It's then if there's 4 or 5 other bands that are all playing, then the scene grows, and then the actual city itself grows and has an environment and an atmosphere where it becomes a place like, oh yeah, you want to go and hang out there. Like in Denmark, is it Django still teaches at the Rhythmic Conservatory?
No, but he did.
Yeah, and that was like a big thing, because then like Marius Nesset and Peter Brun and others.
He started
his classroom was great with Daniel Erskidal, with Marius Nesset. A lot of very great musicians. That became. I think that is very important.
Because they had Django Bates. Today they have a guitar player from Sonic Youth. So they're pushing the boundaries. It's not,
So I now live in a village just outside of Edinburgh, and there's 15 musicians living there. They're not all jazz musicians. There's a guy from Loud. This is a folk electronic group, and some traditional musicians and some jazz musicians. And this is interesting because we're not the sort of sense of the exclusively jazz economy here being difficult and frustrating, and then suddenly when jazz is placed alongside these other musical styles. So we did a festival in Edinburgh where we recreated our village in the city, and we recreated the bar with multimedia, and there's an old guy that always sits at the bar. We made him out of papier-mâché and this kind of stuff, and then we recreated the village hall and all these things. And then all of the musicians performed, and to see, and they're really great, these folk musicians are, to see jazz alongside that really makes people go, wow, these jazz musicians are doing something completely different, and there's a sense of what we're doing being totally valued by the other musicians, and the quality of it really standing up, even though in many ways these other guys economically are much more successful than us. Their scene is much bigger, and so I'm enjoying living in a multi-genre world. And we put on these experimental gigs in our village with experimental folk musicians and jazz musicians and just noise improv musicians, and we're all coming together to play in the village hall, and then 50 people come. So it's I guess it's because I'm 49 and I'm sort of tired of trying to fight with jazz, but it's providing a different place to, in a sort of do-it-yourself way of finding lovely musical experiences, and I'm still loving it. So,
I don't know if you have heard about Oslo. In Oslo, they have the most mainstream one of the most mainstream festival in Norway, Oslo Jazz Festival. And Paul Nielsen-Love and the community of free jazz musicians in Oslo wanted to do a small festival for attack this festival because they didn't have gig there for many years. Yeah. And then after a few years of fighting, it became a sort of joint venture. Now today you have blowout inside the Oslo Jazz Festival. Of course, you can think that Paul Nielsen-Love could play on the main stage instead of Keith Jarrett, but thinking to have in the same program a sort of pair opportunity in a very different kind of venue of the same big umbrella of jazz festival, it's important. You have to try to think. I remember when Paul Nielsen-Love was in Molde when Pat Metheny was artist in residence. If you think to Paul Nielsen-Love and Pat Metheny, you think that they live in different planets. But Pat Metheny fallen in love for Paul. He was absolutely fallen in love for Paul, and he said to the audience, Paul Nielsen-Love for president, because he was a great drummer, the best drummer that he ever heard in the last few years, he said. And that's true. It's try to merge things, not this kind of boundaries, my neighbor, your neighbor, or what about... I think that's what you think about folk, and this is the way, but not to do delusion about only bullshit and only big star. Please, work on the quality.
Okay,
that's for me very important.
This is something that I want to pick up, and you used the word that you used to me in the email, because you talked about folk, and you've talked about noise, and you've talked about free improv and classical musicians and all these sort of people come together, and other than a brief mention of Sonic Youth, we've had no mention of of pop music. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is that it seems that we're talking about music that we could consider to be arty or experimental or interesting, and probably not necessarily commercial. So when we were talking about this idea in the preparation for this panel of dilution and crossover, Luca, if you don't mind me reading it, you said one of the ways to ensure that jazz festivals and programming could look towards the future is to make sure that it's not just Sonny Rollins and Keith Jarrett every year and all other pop bullshit acts. which made me laugh, and then I took a step back and I thought, yeah, I can totally see how that's really relevant to what's going on in a lot of big festivals. And one of the, just anecdotally from speaking to other musicians around Edinburgh, one of the things that people often complain about is the fact that we regularly see Jules Holland or Van Morrison and this year Curtis Stigers, and you get the people that work in the jazz world saying, oh, yeah, but they're not really jazz, or that's maybe what they refer to as the kind of pop bullshit, so to speak. But then the flip side to that argument is actually they bring in a lot of revenue for the festival, and they allow other things to happen at the festival that essentially subsidise other things that happen at the festival. So I'm just wondering if you guys have got any thoughts, or maybe Niels, it's a good time to come to you again, about how the role of more mainstream, possibly acts that might be viewed as commercial, as opposed to jazz in this kind of more reified sense that we think about it.
Okay, it's not. Yeah, I think it's really important, because we have been talking about music on the avant-garde side, the career side this weekend, but there's a whole lot of there's a commercial aspect, not only in money but also in getting a new audience. I mean, it's so important, because we have so many ideas of what people could hear. I'm arranging concerts in my hometown, and last year we had a concert with Snarky Puppy, and it was sold out in 12 hours. I've never tried anything like it, 700 tickets, and I was there, and I'm over 25. My dad was there, he's over 25. I said, but the other 700, they were under 25. There's a young audience there. And of course, at our age, we can say, yeah, that's kind of fusion, kind of 80s, blah, blah. But I think that they really did a good job, and they keep on doing that. And I think so. It's so good that there's a young audience coming, and a lot of them, of course, were playing themselves. But anyway, that's great. You have. For the first time I experienced, we had buses coming from Copenhagen to our town. I mean, it's usually the other way around, because there's something going on in a younger audience we should follow.
When they got the Grammy, I put on Facebook, this is fantastic to see a jazz act get a Grammy like that. And all these people went, they're not jazz, you know. And I had this big battle on, and I was going, of course they're jazz, you know. Of course they're great improvisers, they're really good musicians. You can tell they know the tradition. But I think the interesting thing about them is this model of marketing and video, and they're very clever, beautiful videos. And we have a great band in Scotland called Fat Suit, which is kind of following their model, but they're really great, you know. And they're young, and they look great. And I applied, but I didn't get in. But they look great, and they sound great, and they're doing a similar model of great videos and promoting, and they're a big group, and they're touring Europe, and you can see that there's these new ways of musicians promoting what they do, and I went to see Snarky Puppy here, and it was the same story of a young audience filling the Queen's Hall, and what was fantastic was they've come to see musicianship, because they were excited about seeing really good musicians. It wasn't about the vocals or the image, it was about these guys can really play, you know? Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's fantastic.
Yes, it's really great. It was not an aging pop singer going jazz or something. No. It really was, they were soloing all the way.
And it is, and I think, you know, I fundamentally believe that improvisation is exciting, you know, for people to watch and to be in the room and experience it. And so it's great to see it happening like that, you know.
I would say one thing, it's about what I mean to dilution without bullshit or only pop stuff. it's about, I think that Punkt in Christiansand is a perfect example of this, because they also have a sort of headline with Laurie Anderson, Brian Eno, David Cillian, but it's in a creative way. They started to do something together. They wanted to have a workshop with John Hassel or Brian Eno and talking about their own stuff and trying to do something. Laurie Anderson played with Arve Henriksen. Fennish played with Nils Petter and with Arve Henriksen. It's a new way to try to create a hub of creativity. That is important for me. Try to put together visual, but not for as a wave, but try to put together because it works, because it's in the, you have a vision about where you are going. Idea of to use live remix that Jan Bang used with New Conception of Jazz for a long time. It became a sort of new way to try to put together very different kind of situations. The Estonian choir with an old Estonian composer video, maybe I didn't remember now the name of him, and or Trio Medieval, and at the same time Fennish and Nick Barsh, very different kind of situations. That it's for me. Also North Sea in a certain way it's good, because you have very headline, very big stars, but at the same time you have small place there where you can listen Terry Sungset that play ice instrument, or Arve Henriksen, or very not known, not big star. You have to use the frame of the festival in a very different level for having different kind of audience and give fair opportunity to all of them, putting in the same kind of frame, not only. I think that's the worst festival, in my opinion. It's in my country maybe one of the worst festivals, because Umbria Jazz in the last year didn't change nothing. Sonny Rollins for 15 years. How is it possible, this? And what it's rising, it's only Van Morrison, or yeah, this year it's a Prince,
Not Prince.
Manifesto, or this kind of stuff, because he died, and but
They actually have dead musicians playing. That's really,
yeah, maybe
That's
it's
really taking the
it's-
fossilization.
yeah.
We are talking about that's and they had a very good opportunity, because they have a young jazz in Foligno that it's of younger community of musicians, Giovanni Guidi, Emanuele Maniscalco, and this kind of musicians that came from Siena Jazz, but they didn't took the opportunity to try to put into the big bubble, into the big cloud of Umbria Jazz, new blood. It's 50 years that they are doing the same stuff, and that's, for me, it's not very good work, I think.
No,
They do a lot of, yes, Berkeley school, jazz school, it's the same after many, many years. You have to think how the world is going. It's not, you can't think only about today and yesterday.
Okay, we are getting through time really, really quickly. So before we open it up to the floor, what I want to do is just ask each one of you just for a couple of sentences on what you think is going to be important for this type of music developing in the future. If you can just crystallise it into a couple of sentences. Are we okay to start with you, Tom?
I think that the understanding of how to teach creativity is it's still got a long way to go. I think it's very early stages, and the emotional, how important the emotional side of it is. And so I think it's very young, and there's a lot of learning still to be done, and there's lots of great work being done, and that will continue to have great impact.
Thank you. Luca, what's going to help
For
in the
me,
development in future jazz?
Think in music, not in a genre, not in jazz or in, and try to do community all the time with more actor possible, university, jazz festival, everybody that can give new blood to the music. That's it have to be. Now we have to think in music, and tomorrow we have to think maybe to the art. Try to put together many arts in the same way. that's for me, it's sharing everything.
Yeah, just like encouraging creativity and like emotional kind of response and contact to encourage people to make something that they feel hugely passionate about and that's like massively important to them. And then they need the festivals to also give you the opportunity to perform. So yeah, so I think again the thing of more outreach work, so more work that's inclusive rather than exclusive, you know, so try and doing stuff in the community, doing stuff with as many people as possible.
Great. And then you're next week about to run the Napier University Jazz School, actually.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Tom's
doing it as
and
well.
Tom as well,
Yeah.
of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be good.
Niels?
I think the future is approaching the people who don't know what jazz is today, or are listening to jazz today. How do we do that? How this? I think one good example is I've attended the Roskilde Festival in Denmark several times. And there's always a few jazz names, but not like people are thinking that they're jazz. I think it was 2 years ago I heard Fire Orchestra, the Mats Gustafsson big ensemble, and I heard them a few months before in a jazz club setting. And in the jazz club setting, it was like the concert of the year. And then I went to Roskilde, and I was standing there with so many more people, and none of them had. Most of them didn't know anything about jazz or were listening to jazz, but it was like, yeah, going on, and it was so great. I mean, at least 75% of them are going back there, and it was like, I'm a Fire Orchestra fan now.
That's
So
right.
that we have to, jazz has to turn up in all the ways where it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, can we, before we open it up to questions, can we thank Niels Overgaard, Dave Kane, Luca Vitali, and Tom Bancroft. Thank you. Okay, so do we have any questions from our audience?
Thank you all for a brilliant panel. I just wanted to ask you all about whether or not you think maybe this idea of Trondheim as one pole and Berkeley on the other is maybe a little bit of a caricature in the following sense. I taught at Berkeley, and I was in the harmony department, and there were 26 others in the harmony department alone, so I understand the factory aspect of that. At the same time, at Berkeley, there's a thing called the Global Jazz Institute run by Daniel Perez, Panamanian pianist. And it's an amazing outreach opportunity for the students. They go play in prisons, they do all sorts of stuff, they develop a sense of community. And the student body at Berkeley is as international as the one you portrayed in Amsterdam, with lots of musicians playing together. I think maybe the difference being that there's a little bit more emphasis on individuality at Berkeley as opposed to group individuality, as you might want to say. But anyway, my question is then: is it possible that maybe the right approach, and maybe this is also true, the people I've talked to that have gone to Trondheim, I know the fabulous Boston brothers who run the Herr Nielsen jam session in Oslo are very oriented toward American jazz styles, and they love playing that music. So is there room for both at a conservatory? I guess that's what I'm saying. We're talking about trying to reach out and have as broad of a conception of music as possible. Wouldn't that be the goal, to be able to enable people to access the deepest parts of African American music along with the deepest parts of European creative music?
I think when I told about these two guys who went to New York, not Berkeley, but went to New York, and they learned a lot there and were happy, and I think, isn't that a good way to do it? I mean, probably the best way to do it is go to the conservatories where they're good at their thing. I mean, we don't want conservatories that are similar.
I actually went to music college in Montreal, McGill, and for 1 year, and it was very traditional and conservative, and that was perfect for me because I rebelled against it and started listening to David Murray and Henny Fagel and a lot of different stuff. And I don't think there's. I think you're totally right. I mean, I would never want to myself or anybody that to say to them, do not study the African American tradition, because I still listen to Elvin Jones every day, and he is my absolute inspiration. But I think what we're talking about quite a lot of layers here, and I think what we're talking about is about identity and identification. And I think for European musicians to recognize that there is now a European aesthetic, and there's a lot of great musicians in Europe that you can identify with, as well as the wonderful musicians from the African American tradition. And it's basically saying that the process of learning is different. So rather than following a really clear curriculum that you have to learn, it's saying you kind of decide your own curriculum. And I think that's the difference. I don't think it's anything to do with whether you study Elvin Jones or not, because I think you can study Elvin Jones the whole time at Trondheim if that's what you want to do, and I'm sure people will do. And you can hear in Norwegian musicians that they are masters of that part of the jazz tradition. So, but I think it's that issue of choosing your own curriculum versus being told this is the curriculum, and I'm very much in favour of the first one.
I think on that point as well, there's something about, yes, the curriculum, but the pedagogy as well. If the basis of the pedagogy is one of replication over innovation, because it works and it's tried and tested, then maybe that's problematic. So yes, the Norwegian Centre and the US Centre was a false dichotomy, but they do, I think, represent that caricature nicely, and for me it does have to come down to pedagogy, and that's why that caricature stands.
And I think you're right. It should be like the ideal conservatoire would be to have two students who come in, and one's a bobhead and one's a whatever, into like avant-garde noise, and they both come in the first year and they're both completely treated equally and given the right tutor to support them. That's, I guess, the dream in many ways. But then it's very difficult to provide that, I guess.
But what I think that's what we were started. Where we started, it was Trondheim against Berkeley, because it was 78, and that was the point. But now it's not this situation. If you look, I talk about Norway because I know better, but now it's very different. What happened in the 78 in Trondheim, it was that they didn't wanted to teach aesthetic. They didn't want. I remember that I talked with Elgen Urbakken recently, and he said, I came from folk. I was a folk percussion player, and when I was at Trondheim Jazz Conservatory, I was so scary, because I had no idea about jazz, about improvisation, about this kind of stuff. And then after a few days, all the teachers said me, don't worry, we are not here for teaching you jazz. You don't have to play swing or bop or stuff. We stimulate you to find your own way and try to teach you how to work with harmonies, how to reach attention, how to live. And that was the the lesson. That was not what to teach to this musician. And I think that's this lesson now, it's very clear in Europe. Many conservatories are better maybe of Trondheim. To Trondheim it was a model opposite to a kind of schema. But now everybody have found their own. I saw the connection of conservatories in Scandinavia, from Copenhagen, Oslo and Stockholm, Gothenburg. It's very good, because now they have a project where a teacher in the different town go to teach in every direction, and also the student have some months in Oslo, some months in Gothenburg, and some months in Copenhagen. It's a very kind of different situation, also for feeling the vibe and the milieu of the city. It's I think that's now we are in process, but we are doing better and better than maybe now we have not a problem to be better in teaching, but to find the space to work out of the teaching for giving opportunity to these musicians that are a bit frustrated if they don't have work in the end, as you said. Or I think that now the new step of teaching is finding opportunity for the musicians, not how to teach, because everybody teach very, very, very good today. Everything is clear. How to we are talking about 100% better, not 99%. When Trondheim started against Berkeley, it was opposite, in my opinion.
Okay, so I've now realised that it's 4 o'clock, and I know there are some people that need to disappear for taxis, including one member of our panel. So Niels, if you need to disappear, then please feel free to do so. We've probably got time for one more question, if someone has one. Yeah?
I just wanted to ask the panel about crowdfunding and how you think that might play into the future of jazz, whether it's a tool for building your own opportunities, or it's maybe using the audience as a crutch, or something entirely different.
I feel split on it because I think it's a really good thing, you know. But at the same time, there's real funding should also be doing a better job. So, but I have got nothing against it personally, and there's this sort of snobbishness about crowdfunding projects not being, you know. I think there's a lot of innovation happening in how everything works, and you know, like Maria Schneider does this sort of thing, which is really great, and I think it's still emerging how these new ways of finding ways through the maze, and everyone needs to try everything, and I don't think we should just dismiss things. I think it's totally valid personally.
I think that's everything that could help. It's a good opportunity to do things, but looking to my country, there are some stuff that are rising in parallel to crowdfunding that are quite dangerous for me. Now we have a magazine that started, they called it a fest, it's a sort of expo, and where musicians play there for free, and it's an exchange of publicity or interviews or CD production, and then many journalists that go there, but more of them are blogger or something like that. Everything, it seems to be, we are going in a amatorial kind of collective situations that for me is very dangerous, because musicians want to be professionals and they want to play music, and I think that's also if the teacher and the people that work in the financial fields, we have to find a way to give opportunity to these musicians to play as a professionist, not as a compassion or exchange of I give you a concert, you give me a page, and or trying to, of course, if good helps a bit crowdfunding, it's a good opportunity. But I think that we have to try to be focused on how to do music in a professional way, and how to give opportunity to the musicians, for also to the audience to listen. Great music, that's maybe the other point.
But I suppose things that are either government funded or, say, label funded also come with a sense of prestige or acceptance because they've been funded by the establishment. But the crowdfunding would give the artistic freedom that you might not get in other places. So it could be a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect as well.
But I think that's how to be free or not free. I think that's maybe in a certain way we have a lot of opportunity to be free now. I saw in Italy we had a collective that Improvvisatori Involontario, El Gallo Rojo, many collective of musicians that wanted to be free. But in the end, as a kind of artistic way, it seems a bit too much self-produced, too much amatorial. I think that for me, talking about Niels Peter Molver, the best album that he did, it was with Manfred and with Ulf Uland, and because some musicians need a producer and to work in music, because if you how to say, in Italian it's very clear how to explain, but in English it's I'm like a baby as usual in English. But yes, you can tell to you your story.
You need someone to pull your head out of your ass.
I think that's, yeah.
Is that what you're trying to say?
You have to have, I think that producer is an important actor in the music. That it doesn't mean that you have to have a producer that want to do dictator.
Yeah.
But I think that you have to be a third eye
Yes.
that give a look to your music, because if you think to your music, everything is the best. And most of the time, you have CDs that are 2 hours. And if you have a producer, it's 30 minutes. How is it possible? Give a look to the last CDs of Rune Gramophone, Hubro, 32, 28 minutes. Because if you are the musician, if you are the composer, everything have to be in, because you are telling your story.
I need you.
Okay, so speaking of...
Can I say one thing?
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry. I do think that we're living in these massive changes in a couple of really significant industries for our music. So in music production, it's made it much easier for everyone to make CDs and record and put on and distribution on SoundCloud. That's a massive change. The change in the record industry and all these things. But then the decline of the print media is a massive impact. So like, I released a CD 4 years ago and we got 10 reviews in broadsheet, really high quality critics. Thankfully they liked it, most of it. And I released a CD this year, and a lot of those newspapers don't do jazz reviews anymore. And then it's moving to blogging, which hopefully will become the same thing, but it's much more atomized. And that's a reason why these small number of people deciding what is good and what is jazz, to me, is dangerous. So, because we're losing this older, authoritative, external voices deciding and feeding back on what's good. And to me, that's a danger for the music moving forward.